All right, welcome to the talk. We are going to be talking about Gobekli Tepe. I'm sure if you told other people about it, we're attending a talk on Gobekli Tepe. People will probably look at you like, "What in the world? What kind of language are you? What are you saying?" So, in order to enter into the conversation of this particular talk, what we're going to have to do, and this is part of understanding Gobekli Tepe, is we're going to go ahead and kind of give an overview of the Paleolithic into the Neolithic age and what specifically is going on within a religious context. Because the interesting thing about Gobekli Tepe is that this site, which is understood to be the very first uh, um, sacred ancient temple site that we know of. That doesn't mean that this will be the end of the story. When it comes to archaeology, there's always somebody discovering something, and once we are so sure about this, maybe we'll find something earlier. But this particular sacred site dates from 10,000 to 9,000, actually even to the 8,000s BCE, but it starts around the 10,000s. Well, here's the problem. The problem is that the Paleolithic age ends, close to that time, and the Neolithic age begins around that time. And so uh, Gobekli Tepe kind of balances between the two. It straddles two different realms between hunters and gatherers and agriculturalists, and so it is semi-settled. If that makes sense. So it really is something that is in between. So let's talk about briefly an overview of the Paleolithic age, and then we're going to go into some religious ideas that will feed directly into Gobekli Tepe. So you'll understand the site as I describe it. So here we go. Uh, what I tend to do is I divide the Paleolithic age into four parts. Uh, so I have the Paleolithic age starting around 2.6 million BCE to around 10,000 BCE. So 2.6 million BCE to 10, sorry, sorry, 2.6 million BCE to 10,000 BCE. My brain is all over the place. Wow, what happened there? New math. Okay, so 2.6 million to 10,000 BCE. And what I do is I divide it up into four parts. I divide it up into what is known as the mimetic modeling, the conceptual modeling, the abstract modeling, and the mythic linguistic modeling. Um, and don't worry, here we'll go over these in just a moment. But the Paleolithic age begins with the advent, the use of stone tools, and theoretically it ends with the beginning of agriculture around 10,000 BCE, which is really not the date, later than that. And the first part is known as the mimetic modeling. The mimetic modeling is basically 2.6 to 1.6 million BCE. So 2.6 to 1.6 million BCE. And the mimetic modeling period of time is basically when we take a look at the stone tools, they just simply appear the way they appear. They're mimic the surroundings. There's nothing too complicated going on here. You see a rock, and you see that somebody took the rock and they broke it into various pieces, and they're using this as a tool. So, so if somebody is digging around and they want to use something that's more efficient, they'll get a stone tool, they'll break the sides, make a sharp point, and they'll use it to dig, or they'll use it to kill you. There's not a lot of thought going on here. The reason why not a lot of thought, this is important, is because people are not living very long. Uh, Typically, during this period of time, People are living to be, well, let's see, sometimes 15 years of age, sometimes 20 years of age, if that, usually not much. So we know from the fashioning of stone tools that the mental capacity is not that, there's not that much going on. And maybe it is because they're not living that long a life. And so the transmission of knowledge is greatly shortened. So you can't figure out much about religion from just looking at broken rocks. So, so, you know, okay, so we move on to the conceptual meaning. Conceptual, so concepts now. Now we see in this next age concepts that are in the various tools. So, for example, this is, well, by the way, 1.9, there's an overlap, if you're wondering. 1.9 million BCE to 500,000 BCE. There's an overlap because, you know, things around the world evolve at different times. Conceptual meaning period of time is that we suddenly see stone tools and they have some sense of intent. It looks like they have some concept in mind in the fashioning of them. So maybe we will see they like axes. These are like bull axes, and they sometimes carve a face on it, or maybe it's sculpt. And so we know that there's concepts going on there. So humanity is there's more going on up here, you know, but still not a lot, and we can't really detect much in the way of religion. We get to the next period of time, however, and the next period of time is the abstract ideal modeling. Abstract ideal modeling. Now, this is a time where we start seeing things. Uh, Humanity is still not living very long, unfortunately. They're still living to be 20 or 25 years of age. So the transmission of knowledge is not that intense. But we start seeing symbols. We start seeing abstract representations, circles, and geoglyphs, and this is going to be important now. We're starting to feed into Gobekli Tepe already. We start seeing something strange about what they're doing with their skeletons. So, so here we go. So we start to look, and for example, we take a look at there's a few places like Skull Cave. The Skull Cave in Kafsi. This is in current day Israel. It discovered a site from 90,000 BCE. Now, 90,000 BCE. The skeletal remains we find they are in the cave. One is holding a boar medal, right? And the bodies are painted with red ochre paint. The skeletons are painted with red ochre paint. And you're thinking to yourself, is that religion? 90,000 BCE. What's religious about red ochre paint? Well, first of all, you have to kind of go through a process, right? Uh, Take a look at the skeletons and think to yourself, wait a second. They would have to let the flesh be removed before they painted it with red ochre paint. In fact, we take a closer look, important, closer look at the skeletons, and we find that there are bird peck marks all over the skeletons. So we know that they did something called excarnation, that they exposed the bones and they let the birds eat the flesh off. They cleaned it all up. And then what they did is they painted it red. But why would they paint it red? That's a very strange thing, unless you really think about it. What does red represent? Well, I mean, red could represent many things. It could represent earth. It could represent blood. Huh, blood. Now, if you if for example you took me and you took out all my blood, would I be doing really well? No, right? I wouldn't be around to do this talk. So that stuff inside of you, right? That fluid keeps you alive. Are you following? So why would they paint the skeletons intentionally red? Well, there must be some connection to blood. There must be some connection to life, right? So there is some religious ritual, got to be religious in a sense, where they believe that whatever they do while they paint, actually, as they paint the bones red, they are affecting something. They're causing something. Some people will say maybe what they're doing is they're trying to revivify the body, skeletons, and to give them life. Other people say, well, blood, it is something that gives us life and it protects us. It protects us from death. And so many ancient cultures throughout the world not only see blood as representing life and keeping life, sustaining life, but they also see it as protecting us from death. And so this concept is there. So there is some sort of perspective in relation to the bones that seems to indicate either a belief in an afterlife or at least doing something magical to protect these bones. This is not just it, because after this time, after 90,000 BCE, we go through a red ochre paint of palooza. Everybody is, this is now, this idea spreads everywhere, from China all the way to Eurasia, you name it. Red ochre paint, this is what you do with bones. This is what you do. And so it gets even more interesting, and this does figure in again with Gobekli Tepe. They also do this. They they start to remove the heads. Yes, yes, they cut off the heads. So we find instances now all over the place, or all over the Mediterranean and other places where they are cutting off the heads or removing the heads or doing excarnation, letting the birds eat away at the bones, and then they remove the heads. So, and in many cases, they will even remove the feet too. So there's this fear that maybe these skeletons can go, they can walk off somewhere, you know. Now, again, important for Gobekli Tepe to remember is the fact that at this time, and this will last for a very long time, even into the pre-dynastic period of Egypt, they believe that your soul, that your spirit is in your head. It's here, right here. That's going to be important. Remember that. Take note of that. Because you can see this on the iconography of Gobekli Tepe, the idea of the removal of the head, right? So, in fact, we'll keep on going. We take a look. There's another site. There's actually quite a few sites in the Kalahari Desert, for example. We have the uh, Tustelio Hills in Africa. Like they found what's evidence around 50 to 40,000 BCE. They found evidence of what they call a bear cult. A bear cult. What does that mean? Well, what it is they found, this is again during the abstract period, they found an image of a man throwing a spear at a bear. Next to it, they found a bear body that was buried. A bear body that was buried. That's a bees there, right? It's almost unbearable. Sorry. Or it actually is bearable. Stopping. So you have the bear body, but the bear body doesn't have a head. Next to the bear body, they found buried a bear head that was originally part of the bear body that was cut off and separated. Next to the bear head, they found a clay image of, guess what, a bear, and they found the fur uh, of the bear in, because we did studies in the clay. So what is going on here? It looks like there's some kind of uh, almost like deferment. Stop the fun. Stop it. Okay, so it looks like that they cut the head off, release the spirit, and put the spirit of the bear into this totem, into this image. There could be other explanations too. There are lots of explanations, but what we do know is that something religious is going on. Isn't that fascinating, right? We take a look at this evidence, and there is so much about it. Um, Other things I want to bring up is that okay, is that we're going to actually move into the next age of the Paleolithic, and this is the age that is on the edge of the Gobekli Tepe. In fact, many people will say Gobekli Tepe is more in this age into the Neolithic. So the fourth part of the Paleolithic age is known as the mythic and linguistic modeling period. Mythic and linguistic. So the abstract ideal modeling period, I didn't give you the date, was 500,000 BCE to 30,000 BCE. When it comes to the mythic linguistic period, it's 40,000, there's an overlap, 40,000 BCE to 10,000 BCE. Mythic linguistic. And with this particular situation is fascinating because what's going to happen is that, remember those symbols that we saw, abstract reasoning? Well, they start coming together, and it seems like language is happening, that there is a sequence to the symbols. There's a sequence to the images, that it can be read, that there is a story going on. So humanity, they're creating stories, and there's evidence that there's a rudiment of language happening. Isn't this exciting? Because when we look at Gobekli Tepe, for example, the vulture stone, we're going to see, wait, there's a story going on here, right? And because of that, we know that this is definitely a byproduct of this particular age. You're going to have, is this interesting, right? So it does remind me of the development of the human mind, doesn't it? As a baby, right? The mimetic period, you just mimic what your parent, does, right? You smile, the baby goes, right? It smiles back, and there's this nice little reception, right? And then the next thing the baby goes through? Concepts, they figure out conceptual ideas, right? Then eventually they become more abstract, and then all of a sudden they get language. And an important part about that, storytelling. Well, what we've experienced through child development is in a short amount of time for each individual child, apparently this is what happened to us and our brains from the beginning of the Paleolithic age to the end of the Paleolithic. That's good, right? Is this making sense? Well, so does it mean that our brains are underdeveloped? It becomes more and more developed? Well, that's one possibility. Another possibility, I think, especially earlier on, the other possibility, and it's most likely, is the transmission of knowledge. People are not living very long. So people live, I told you in the beginning, 15 to 20 years of age. By the time we get to the linguistic mythic period of time, people are living, it's so sad. They're living into their 20s, maybe. There are a few people that are living into their 40s. Those are exceptions, real exceptions. And a large portion of those people living in their 40s, this will kind of throw you off, are women, even though it seems to reverse itself later on. Huh. Well, okay, we'll go there in a little bit. So, in fact, we see during the mythic linguistic period of time, we see more female bones being buried in prominent ways than we see male bones. So we will see them oftentimes surrounding with various grave goods, various flowers, but uh, overs of various plants that were used for medicinal reasons. We'll see emblems that look like that are connected to power, and it appears that many of these are leaders. Uh, we'll go there in a few moments, but it's fascinating going into this. And of course, red ochre paint, and they're still chopping off the heads, sometimes chopping off the feet. That's just the agony of the feet. Sorry. So what happens now is as follows: we are hunters and gatherers, right? But unfortunately, um, we don't. We have a very short memory because we're living such a short life. Basically, what happens is that if you live to be, let's just say 20 years of age, 20 to 25. You're giving birth. It's a little earlier in those days. You're giving birth starting menstruation starts at 8 or 9 in those days. 8 or 9 years of age. That's pretty early, right? Then again, you have less of a life. But think to yourself, by the time the kid is gained maturity, mom and dad are pretty much almost dead, right? So how much information are they going to receive? So the transmission of knowledge is going to be cut short because people are just not living that long. But they were hunters and gatherers, and in the society, and this again, this all fits in with Gobekli Tepe. I'm actually telling you part of the story of Gobekli Tepe. You just don't know it yet. So that's you're going. Are we going to get there? Yes, we are actually are there, but we're giving you the context. Okay. Uh, Hunters and gatherers. Now, with hunters and gatherers, women would do the gathering and men would do the hunting. It has nothing to do with, how do I put this? It's nothing to do with a problem of gender because the societies are egalitarian. They're extremely egalitarian. But what happens is this there are exceptions. We have found some women are hunters. We find them buried with hunting implements. But for the most part, we find men buried with hunting implements and in the material culture. But what happens is this: women, uh, you guys do something that's pretty magical. It happens every month, and I know that you're excited about what's happening. This is a great moment. Talk about red ochre paint, right? And it's a great moment. Um, what happens is that it's blood, right? You are shedding blood. And of course, this blood is looked at as sacred in many ways. But if you know anything about hunting, and some of you do, animals do smell blood. They do, and predators they smell blood, and they want to attack. They think the animal is bleeding, and of course, those prey, they're scared and they run. So it does throw off the hunting a little bit. But there's another, of course, there's other reasons besides that too. But and that is that women do something else that's magical. What happens is that one day the woman starts to grow and get bigger and bigger and bigger, and out comes a baby. Yes. And the father is so excited. He holds up the baby and says, "Look, it looks just like my best friend." Yeah, he doesn't have a clue. You see, at first they thought that women are the ones who did all the creation. Men, they imprint, you know. So it takes a while for them to figure out, and of course, shortness of lifespan, they have anything to do with the process. Now, that's going to change with the beginning of the end of the Paleolithic into the Neolithic age, where men realize, hey, look, we have a part in this process. We're part of the creation process. It's like this epiphany. And at that moment, suddenly we have phallic symbols all over the place, everywhere. This figures in with Gobekli Tepe. Gobekli Tepe exhibits that, that realization that they're part of this process. Is this interesting, right? Is this making sense? Are you following, right? But because women do this, they are creators. They are creatrix. They are the ones that create life, just like the earth. They create life. So they make a connection between women that creates life and the earth that also creates life, that gives life to the grass, and the bushes, and the trees, right? And life-giving water comes out of it and so forth, right? They make this connection, but also it's connected to also the life of animals, the birds, the mammoth that will of course last forever, you know, all these life forms that we feed upon life. So women are viewed as sacred in so many different ways, and they're venerated as sacred. So we're going to find everywhere all of these female figurines, oftentimes with a big belly, engorged breasts, because it's all about fertility and giving life, right? So this is magical. Okay, well, also talk about engorged breasts. Women do something else. After the birth, they feed the baby. And usually it's not just breast milk, it is not just for a year, 4 to 5 years breastfeeding. Now, taking menstruation, giving birth, and of course connecting to the children, and and of course the breastfeeding, and you can see where women are oftentimes relegated to gathering closer to home. Is that making sense? You guys are you seeing the internal logic? So it's nothing to do with that, as it has something to do that you want to hear this. That is this. Here it is. Those men, they go off and hunt, and they go off hunting looking for those mammoth, because they want to feed. You get a mammoth, it's going to go for a while. You're going to be eating that meat for a long time, or an oryx, or whatever it may be, or a reindeer, right? But they go away for many days, and you'll probably see 5 or 6 of them go, and four, 3 come back. So who's going to be in charge while they're away? And so, as it turns out, the evidence demonstrates that men were not the leaders. Oftentimes, the women were leaders because they're the ones at the camp. Is that making sense? They're the stability. So that's why these women are buried with so much dignity, because they are stable leadership. The men are always leaving. They're coming back, and there's less of them, and they're gone for a long time. You can't make any decisions on leadership that's absent. Is this making any sense? Right? Are you following this? So the irony is that the gathering aspect and the women being relegated to the campsite actually makes them the leaders. Now, of course, the campsite will change from time to time. In fact, typically they change campsites 4 to 6 times a year. What they do is they follow the stars. And, this is a sky cult. Again, we've been talking about Gobekli Tepe. Still, we're actually talking about it. I just haven't given you the temple yet. So, so what happens is that they look at the stars to see where they're going to go to the next campsite. They look at the stars. You see what happens is you got the Earth, right? Here's the Earth. It's actually, make it look like it's flat. I better do that. Let's try to make a curve. Here's the Earth, right? And so you have, of course, we're looking at the northern hemisphere. And so what happens is that when of course the sun is equal, of course you've got the equinox. Are you guys getting this right? And then it turns right, and you got the summer solstice, and then the right again it's vernal equinox, right? The winter solstice. And what's happening here is there's a movement, and that means the stars are different depending upon the season. So when the stars look different in the sky, they go, okay, it's time to move to the next campsite. But they make a connection. And that connection is they start to believe that the stars decide the seasons, because the stars change based upon the angle of the earth. And they think that maybe it's the stars that have that power. Okay? Maybe the stars have that energy. And then, of course, they look at the sun, but they also look at the moon. The moon affects the tides. So they start worshiping and they start venerating the sky. And so we see evidence of this in caves. We see an early, almost an early zodiac. which you'll also see at Gobekli Tepe. You'll see positions, points that look like stars. Even at Lascaux in southern France, in the caves, you'll see star constellations. They're keeping track because they want to know where those stars are and when they change, because they need to know when to go to the next campsite to find the best food to ensure sustenance. Right? They want to live. So so they have they have the sky cult belief system. So look at the sky, and how are you going to get closer to the sky spirits? Well, you're going to build on a hill or a mountain, just like Gobekli Tepe is built on a hill. Right? You're going to find a high spot to worship the sky gods. Well, how are you going to worship the earth goddess or the earth spirits that are feminine? Well, what you're going to do is you're going to either, on the ground or in caves. We'll find many images there. So you go to a sacred cave. Oh, one fun fact. Did you know that we're looking at many of the caves in Spain and France, and we look at the hand shape of those who are doing the artwork, and they're female hands. So in the past, we always thought that men are doing all the artwork. Apparently, the majority of the artwork of these caves are done by women. Again, they're the ones are in the domestic space and they are in leadership roles, but they're doing the artwork. Okay. So as we move along, so Gobekli Tepe is gonna be really easy to understand after going through all these concepts. You'll just be like, aha, oh, I get it, I understand it all. Okay. So now, um, some other concepts I want to make sure we bring up. Okay. So we also know, I'll just bring this up. We know we know what they ate based upon their poop. It's called paleo poop. What happens is that I told you they go to campsite to campsite. People were creatures of habit. We really are, and they always tend to go back to the same campsites year after year, and they go to the same place to go number two, and the poop tends to pile up. And we can do stratigraphy, and we can do carbon dating on it, and we can do other kinds of dating on it, and we realize we know how old it is, and we can look at their diet based upon what they ate over a period of time by looking at what they leave behind. Sorry, I can't help it. So we take a look at the paleo poop, and we realize they're eating mostly meat because it's in their poop. We find also tons of animal bones, and we find teeth marks in the animal bones, so we know that they're eating lots of meat. Then all of a sudden, here we go, things start to change because the ice age starts to end around 13,000 BCE. The ice sheets go away, they lift away, and of course those slow moving reindeer and mammoth go north, and those who decide to stay, they're left with they're left with rabbits and deer and gazelle. And here's the problem: is that they're faster. You can't catch them. So we know the men come home with less meat. And you're going, how do I know that? Because now you look at the paleo poop and you take a look and you go, hey, look, there's less meat. But because of that, they have to substitute the diet with more vegetative materials. So the women who are gathering are going to compensate for the lack of food and they're when it comes to meat, and they're going to go ahead and get more plant life, and they'll figure out more and more about how plants live and operate, and they figure out how to maybe we can bring the seeds back to the dwelling place that we're at, and because of this, eventually this will lead to agriculture. Is this cool? See how this works? So gradually, it'll lead to agriculture because the meat sources are not there. Yes, and I did mention the gazelle, and we're going to go here for a second. Did you know the majority of animal bones that we find at Gobekli Tepe are gazelles? This is one of the saddest stories of humanity. Here we go. So We want to domesticate animals. Well, we domesticate the dog around 13,000 BCE. That's pretty good. And these dogs, they're basically wolves that follow us around, and they're scavengers, and we give them food. It's easier to live off us and our scraps than hunt around, and they have since, of course, obviously become very dependent upon us. Give us scraps, give us scraps. If our dog is begging, that's what we did to them. you know, you know, because that's how they survived. So 13,000 BCE, doggies, and we even find this is really cute. People buried with their dogs. Yeah, already. So I mean, they're not eating their dogs. It comes later. I think that's interesting. They don't eat their dogs. They'll eat humans. Oops, but they won't eat their dog. Okay, so um, but they do. The dogs keep away predators and so forth. Okay, but with gazelles, humanity they tried to domesticate the gazelle. They start trying to domesticate the gazelle between 13 to 12,000 BCE. Around 12,000 to 11,000 BCE, they're trying to domesticate the gazelle. It's not working. 11 to 10,000 BCE, they're trying to domesticate the gazelle. It's not working. 10,000 to 9,000 BCE, they're going to try to domesticate the gazelle. Not going to work out. 9,000 to 8,000 BCE, they try to domesticate the gazelle. And they go, you know what? Maybe this is not working. 4,000 years. What's wrong with us? 4,000 years. And it's so sad. We look at the Natufians, like in Jericho and other sites, and we see that they're really trying to domesticate these gazelles. We find little gazelle bones in these enclosures that seem to get higher and higher and higher because gazelles will whoop. They can't domesticate them. So sadly enough, in Gobekli Tepe, they're still in the middle of, hey, you know what? Someday we're going to domesticate those gazelles. Eventually, they gave up and it went to the goats. That's the next animal they decided upon. Goats. Why goats? After goats, by the way, the goats don't work out. It took 500 years to figure that out. The goats, what they like to do is they pull the grass out by the roots. And when you do that, it leaves a denuded landscape. And then when it rains, it washes off the topsoil and creates a desert. There are places today in the Middle East that are deserts, thanks to the goats. So that experiment, finally, sheep, what they do is that they eat the top part of the grass. They don't pull out by the roots, and they become the dream animal. They're great for wool. They're great for food. They drink for milk. That's the dream. So in the Middle East, everything's about sheep. But during the time of Gobekli Tepe, the sheep and the goats are still wild, and it's the gazelles they're focused upon. Oh well. Okay, so now one last little bit before we jump into the site, and that is sacrifice. Okay, so and Gobekli Tepe is a sacrifice site. It's a sacrificial center. It is absolutely. So the sacrifice. Here it is. Humanity observed that life feeds upon life. Life feeds upon life. They observed it. They saw the animals. They're eating the grass. It's living. They in turn ate the animals. So they thought life feeds upon life. They made this connection, therefore, into the natural world. Life feeds upon life. And because at first they believed everything is connected by it's animism, spirit that pervades all things. Eventually, of course, as time goes on, this animistic idea, they start going, well, they kind of divide it up into sections, sky spirits, earth spirits, water spirits, spirits of the underworld, vegetative spirits, animal spirits, and then they become a little bit more, they start, we get into the mythic linguistic period. Let's start giving them names. So we want to call specifically on these kinds of spirits as opposed to those kinds of spirits. When I call upon a sky spirit, we're asking a water spirit problem. And then, of course, from there, you're going to start getting hierarchies, especially as humanity gets more organized, like the towns and the cities, they're organized as above, so below. The gods now become organized. You have gods and goddesses, and then you have spirits further down. This all happens. So, but life feeds upon life. So they figure they got to feed the spirits. They got to feed them. Now, how do you feed a spirit? That's pretty difficult, right? So what they figure out is, well, they gotta give it food, so they gotta, sacrifice something. They gotta feed it. So they gotta feed it life. So you're gonna have different kinds of sacrifices. We find evidence in archaeological record of people actually giving fruit sacrifices and the pits of the fruit. We find people offering, offerings of different kinds of vegetative materials to the gods and herbs and so forth, spirits. But then they also um, start doing animals, animal sacrifice. It's so the idea is they will burn the animal. Usually it's a total burning of the animal at first, opposed to partial. And so what happens is as they burn the animal, it transfers over into spirit stuff. And the spirits are eating it all up and they're strengthened, they have power. And why do you feed the gods or the spirits? Because the reason is that you want to make them strong and happy. You see, what happens during the Paleolithic into the Neolithic age is that if it's not raining, for a long time, we need the rain. Maybe it's because the gods or the spirits are hungry. They don't have enough energy to give you the rain, or maybe that they're not happy with you. So you better feed them. This idea does continue on. Anthropology goes into this. So this idea goes into belief systems of Oceania. We're going to see this with the Mayans, the Toltecs, and the Aztecs. We're going to see this in Peru. We're going to see this in belief systems of sub-Saharan Africa. We're going to see this in earlier perspectives of the indigenous peoples of the Americas. Seriously, earlier Celtic religions. I'm sorry, we see this everywhere. Life feed upon life. We're going to see this even early Indo-European beliefs going into aspects that you can see kind of aspects in the Vedas, in the, uh, parts of it in the Brahmanas. We'll talk about it, for example. You're going to see this in other places too. So this is everywhere. So you feed them an animal. Now what happens is that if they're still not strong enough or happy enough, you kind of up the ante. You kind of go, okay, it's not working. So you give bigger animals or better animals. Kind of like, you want to give your the gods hamburger helper, or you want to give them filet mignon. Who will they be more happy with? Well, hey, give them the best. So as time goes on, they want the best. What if it still doesn't rain? This is we're still talking about Gobekli Tepe. Still doesn't rain. Then you move to the next level: human sacrifice. Human sacrifice. And so yes, there's human sacrifice at Gobekli Tepe. You desperate times, desperate measures. Maybe they want the sacrifice of us. Maybe we got to give ourselves up. And it's real sacrifice. So you're gonna have that in evidence. And then later on, they'll start tying ideas like, oh, ethics. Why don't I suppose to sacrifice ourselves literally, sacrifice ourselves figuratively, or ethically, or so forth. So religion does evolve. But Gobekli Tepe is really caught in this interesting realm. Now, we're talking about it, so we'll go there. And that is, who built Gobekli Tepe? These are the Natufians, Natufians, Natufians. Natufians are interesting in many ways. They they straddle a kind of like two different ages. They straddle the Paleolithic into the Neolithic age. So they are around 13,000 BCE to 8,000 BCE. The Tufians are everywhere throughout the Middle East. We're talking everywhere. So the Natufians are an egalitarian society. The Natufians are sophisticated in many different ways. They're semi-nomadic. In fact, what happens is they are hunters and gatherers that wander from place to place, and then they start to get settled down as the things change, as the ice sheets go north, it becomes warmer. They start having permanent settlements, but they're still hunters and gatherers. And then something happens, which is it's interesting, is that you have suddenly got cold again, and that is known as the a younger Dryas catastrophe. The younger Dryas catastrophe, which is 10,000, 9,000 to 9,600 BCE. What happened, basically, according to James Kennett, Professor Emeritus of the Department of Earth Sciences at the University of California, Santa Barbara, what happened is, well, most likely a comet hit the Earth on the North American side of things. In fact, we take a look, and he had 21 universities work on this in 6 different countries, and they identified nano diamonds of an of a extraterrestrial nature in the soil, spanning about 15 million square kilometers across the northern hemisphere. We've done tests on it. In fact, if you go to California, you can drill in our soil here. You'll find evidence that, hey, look, it happened. Uh, so it got suddenly cold again during again, the young Dryas period. During this time, we lost the short-faced bears, and the mastodons go extinct, and the giant grand sloths. Sure, we all miss the giant grand sloth. I know we're still mourning that. Saber-toothed cats. We lost the American camels, and the horses in America has gone extinct. So it has to be reintroduced again when the Spaniards arrived, right? What happens is the Tufians are suddenly, oh no, we gotta retreat. We have to, and so they leave their dwelling places and they go back to migrating from place to place to place. Interesting part here else. Right after, directly after, so they 9,600 BCE is the end of the young Dryas period, right? So it suddenly gets warm again right after that. It's around 9,500 BCE that we know for sure that Gobekli Tepe is established. Maybe a little earlier, but it looks like that as things get warm again, the Natufians are returning again into a semi-settled state. Does that make sense? So things are changing back again. The Natufians, very interesting people. I said they covered much of the Levant. What I mean by that is that in your mind, I would just name the countries that, okay, so the areas the Tufians used to occupy for all those 4,000 years are the following countries today: Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, northern Iraq, and eastern Turkey. So think about all those areas, right? And they had when it came to typically when it came to their dwelling places, in short, is that as we see all over the place, is the advent of the uh, how do I say this is the pre-pottery Neolithic. You take a look at their dwelling places, and most of them are circular, so they are now settling again. They're now creating villages again. One of their villages is known as Jericho, for example, becomes kind of a town with a tower, and but most of the dwellings were made of brick. They were circular, and they buried the bodies under the ground. That's right. So under the ground, they buried the bodies. So, and they buried your family under the ground. Gobekli Tepe. It's interesting. It is. As I said, it's the oldest temple or sacred enclosure site that we know. It's about 6 miles outside of Urfa in eastern Turkey, and it is perched 1,000 feet above the valley. Remember, we talked about sacred hills, sacred mountains? Well, here we go. Gobekli Tepe is on top of one of these sacred mountains. The name Gobekli Tepe actually means belly hill. I talked about this one time, and somebody thought I said Benny Hill. Well, it's not Benny Hill. It's Belly Hill, right? And in fact, they initially mistook the site as a medieval site. Boy, were they ever wrong, right? It is a 22-acre site, and we take a look at it. It is characterized by a circular row of stones that intentionally face inward, pointing to what resides at the center of the ring. These stones. They are a series of limestone stones. They are T-shaped. They look like a T, right? Most rise as high as about 3 meters, about 10 feet high, but some are even taller. One, get this, is 18 feet high and weighs 16 tons, right? So some have estimated that it would take a labor force because each one was created all at one time at different times, around 500 workers to make it. So it took a while. Again, it took a while for them to figure this out. They did think it was a medieval site. The one person who did discover it, his name is Klaus Schmidt. He was in charge until 2014, and unfortunately, he passed away. It was a big surprise and upsetting to many of us. But Schmidt took a look, and he's the one who identified it. And these stones were so close to the surface that they still had scar marks from the plows. So people are plowing their fields, and they were starting to scar the tops of these stones. Uh, it is identified to be a pre-pottery Neolithic A site, 9,500 to around 8,000 BCE. As I mentioned, it is right at the end of the Young Dryas, so the Earth is getting warmer. Now, the site of Gobekli Tepe, um, it was exceptionally fertile. It was absolutely beautiful. In fact, Schmidt described the place as much like as a paradise. He said that prehistoric people would have gazed upon herds of gazelle, yeah, those gazelle again, and other wild animals, and gently flowing rivers, which attracted migrating geese and ducks, fruit and nut trees, and rippling fields of wild barley and wild wheat varieties, such as emmer and einkorn, right? So Göbekli Tepe really was a beautiful, beautiful place. It was at the very edge of the Fertile Crescent. It was ideal. It was almost like a theater on the hill, overviewing such a uh, lush and fertile region, which is look like that today. But in those days, it was pretty amazing. Those who worshipped at Göbekli Tepe, they must have lived around a 100-mile radius around the park, on the area. We know that, of course, that this is a hunter-gatherer society. They're hunters and gatherers. But we know that domestication of plants was still unknown at this time. Animal husbandry was not practiced. The only thing that there's evidence of anything being domesticated are doggies. But other than that, it's not happening, right? Gobekli Tepe, as we know from taking a look at the evidence, seems to be a place where people would gather and they would have great feasts. In fact, we have seen an enormous amount of meat that was in here, as well as I mean a large amount of meat. We find the animal bones and other things that tell us that they're eating lots of meat here. I mean, lots of meat. We find lots of bones, and we know that they are chewing on these bones, right? So that's interesting too. So it did facilitate very large crowds. So when people got here, they ate a lot. I'll bring this up. What I think is fascinating is that a lot of scholars are wondering why, but they kind of left their mess behind to a certain degree. They would when they move things around, they would just simply bury the bones and things that were left over from these giant meals, uh, you know, as opposed to cleaning everything up and putting it somewhere else. And many people interpret this as the fact that they viewed the food as they're eating it as also sacred because they did offer some of it, quite a bit of it, to the gods. Remember, life feeds upon life, right? So we see that moving right along is that well, at first they built a larger ring of these T shapes stones, and then they built a second smaller ring inside of the first one. And then a few decades later, they built a third inner ring. And then after a while, they would tear down all of them and they build another ring in another location and do the same thing. So you have concentric ring. So you have a ring and a ring within a ring and a ring within a ring. And then they tear that down. And I mean, it's a kind of a controversy. Some people would say, well, it's because of erosion from the hill that the first ring got buried, and then the second ring was there, and the second ring got buried, and the third ring was built. Uh, and then they built a new site. That's a possibility. But either way, they would constantly renew these rings. An interesting part I do want to mention is that the first set of rings, the earliest set of rings, were the most sophisticated, the best art. It was the most descriptive. And then each subsequent ring that was built over a period of time was less and less sophisticated. There's evidence here of almost a de-evolution in art. It gets worse as opposed to better. And I know you think it would be the other way around, but that's not exactly what happened. Um, and so we have, of course, we take a look at these rings, and there is a total of 149 sculptures found at Gobekli Tepe. I'm pausing for a moment. 149. That's a lot, right? 86 of these sculptures depict animals. Sorry, uh, 38 depict humans. Four are masks. Three are phallic symbols. Nine are human-animal combinations put together, and nine we just can't figure out what's going on. So, so we see this concerning animal depictions. I'm going to take a look at one, for example. I will be taking a look at quite a few, but let's look at pillar number 43. Pillar 43, Gobekli Tepe. Um, we see on the western side of this pillar just so many different motifs. Uh, the dominant motif is a vulture. It lifts its left wing while the right wing points to the front. It seems to be gesturing at a sphere and a disc that can be seen at the tip of the right wing. So it seems to be pointing at a circle. Okay, right of the vulture is another bird, maybe an ibis or maybe even a young vulture. I don't know. Right? It looks like this is a gesture of protection. What is that round sphere? What could it possibly be? Be an egg? Could it be the sun or the moon? Could it be human head? What is this circle? Well, there's more. Right above it, there's a snake and two H-shaped symbols, and a wild fowl is depicted. And then on the pillar's shaft is a huge scorpion, as well as the head and neck of another bird, which is interesting. But we also see something else, a representation of a headless human with an erect penis, and it's pretty recognizable within this configuration, right? No head. We can't find the head anywhere unless it is the head that seems to be pointed at by the vulture. We take a look at this. Remember, it is the mythic linguistic period, and we know, yes, something is religious going on. There's a story that is here that is being told. The question is, what is that story? What is it? But we look at this, and we also see, it's such a great image, a row of three rectangular objects with arches on the top of them that looks like a representation, get this, of the enclosure of Gobekli Tepe. So it's making an image, in a sense, of the sacred space. So, so what is it? A Muslim Erkan, he says this is a scene of a sky burial in which the soul, sometimes symbolized as the head, is figuratively carried up to the sky world, right? So that's a possibility. Alistair Combs says, well, its central figures, such as the headless man, the scorpion, and the vulture, does seem to resonate with the theme of death, suggesting the scenario to reflect afterlife beliefs of the builders. But still, we're not sure. Others will take a look at the scorpion and realize that it connects with medicine and magic, right? And so it could be in connection to this. Of course, the vulture, which is interesting, has to do, vultures, they eat the dead. They eat what's already dead. So there's a thought system that this has to do with an after death cult in some sense. Others say no. We have found evidence, for example, that yes, the head is where the soul is. But we have found later on during the Paleolithic age, we have found evidence that the head detachment, um, they would make a representative head that connects to a magical principle connected to shamanism. And so some scholars have said that it represents the ritual beheading of a shaman that is figurative, but it is not actual. And that through this ritual action, the shaman experiences an epiphany. And so, in a sense, his mind goes somewhere else, literally maybe off his head, right? And so, this is a possible explanation for this figure. Well, why the raised phallus? Well, this is the moment of epiphany. Although it also could connect to the idea that of procreation, right? The idea that the regenerative aspect. And there's another boring reason I should add this. Or the other possibility is because we have found human heads at the site, is they simply chop the person's head off at the moment of woohoo, and that magic was believed to go into the earth in order to ensure productivity. I did mention the fact because there are two other phalli at the site and other places besides that, is that um, they're just figuring it out right now that males have a part in in creation. Usually, remember that before it was just the women, the magic, right? They grew bigger and suddenly they gave life. Now they figured out they're living long enough to go, you know what? men may have a part in this. And so that's where we see this possibility. Isn't that fascinating, right? Just we just went over just a vulture stone, and so much is in there, right? Um, we do see some strange connections with the vulture, and we do see images that seem to connect to the stars, the sky above. So some people will say this does have to do with, and people have been seeing, animals in the stars for a long time. The zodiac concept goes way back, and so the scorpion may represent indeed part of the constellations, and there have been good scholars that have mentioned this. Okay, um, I do like Pillar 51, but it's not really that interesting for most of you. It just has a relief of a big cat. I think it'd be great for a T-shirt. Okay, moving right along. Pillar 56 is very noteworthy. We have 55 animals depicted on this one. They really crowded it in. It's packed. So what do we see on here? Well, we see a group of ducks, and then we see a bunch of snakes, and then we see a large bird of prey clutching a snake in its claws. Then we see more ducks, and then we see snakes. In fact, we see lots of snakes. Seem to be obsessed with snakes. Snakes are all over the pillars of Gobekli Tepe. We know that snakes are important. In fact, they are besides, they're the most depicted animal in Gobekli Tepe, those are reptiles, are snakes. And the snakes are interesting because we realize that sometimes the snakes are presented as attacking animals, as hunting animals. And as it turned out, archaeology has revealed that sometimes with their arrows, they would use a snake holder to put their arrows in, and they would use snake venom to kill the animals. And so it is very possible that the snakes represent the venom that kills the animals when they shoot it for hunting. Isn't that fascinating? So the snake has that connection. Of course, there's obviously the regeneration aspect because snakes do shed their skin too. Um, we take a look, of course, most of the animals, 60% of the animal bones that we find here are gazelles. They haven't learned their lesson yet. Um, but we find lots of oryx as well. So, and snakes attacking oryx and so forth. Okay, so that kind of covers that. Um, we take a look at also at the pillars. We realize that many of them have a hand at the edges of the T's. On one side you see a hand, the other side you see a hand, especially the older circle. And so it does seem to depict uh, stone people in a circle, maybe holding hands. Isn't that fascinating? So they're holding their hands. Maybe it is the idea of a ancient ritual circle where they held hands. Maybe it is a circular dance where they held hands. But it's pretty obvious. You take a look, you go, hey, look, they put a hand on one side of the T, put a hand on the other. So it doesn't take, it doesn't take too much thinking to go, maybe they're holding hands. This idea is lost upon the next circles. So this is the earliest concept that we see there with Gobekli. Um, so they could be stylized human beings. We also even see shoulders being placed upon the pillars as well. Are they rulers? Are they high-ranked priests? Are they heads of clans? Maybe the initial 16-ton limestone pillars in the middle connected with the animals. Each of the animals represent maybe a clan. So there's 16 different clans coming together to have a sacred meal at this site. Now, that kind of makes a lot of sense. So they're doing the migration, but they still have time to meet together and do a ritual action here at Gobekli Tepe. Okay, so other things I want to bring up. Yes, we do see lots. I told you, phallic symbol. We see it quite a bit, and we see three prominent ones. There's another one too. I shouldn't even bring it up. We do find there's a female figure with her legs spread out, and there are multiple phalli placed going within her. That was towards the end. One archaeologist called it maybe a graffiti. Others will say, well, no, it's the idea again of productivity as a possibility. So we do also see, on top of all that, um, how do I put this? Is that yeah, I'll just keep going. There's just so many things. Oh, we do find masks. We find four different mask types there. And it's interesting because the focus is upon the eyes and the nose and hardly ever the mouth. And we see this design, these are stone masks, but we see this design everywhere and amongst the Natufian. So it's not just Gobekli Tepe, it's other sites at the same time. And so it's possible that they wore masks for these rituals. We were talking about the oryx. These are, of course, the ancestor of domestic cattle. And just a little bit of fun archaeology puzzle. I'll just bring it up. They found an oryx bone with an embedded flint projectile point fragment in it, and we did an analysis on it, the way it's put together, the way it's positioned, and it turned out that the hunter had to be about 10 meters directly in front of this animal in order to hit it just there. So when they're hunting, they got really close. It's like, and we got them. Okay, so you can imagine. We've also unearthed, of course, three Neolithic skull fragments. Um, and evidence, of course, there is markings on these skulls that are unique. They're placed there. We don't know what these mean, but there's some kind of ritual purpose connected to these remains. As far as the settlement is concerned, Gobekli Tepe, at first they said there was no settlement, and other people have said they are a settlement, but they have found evidence of giant buildings that seem to be at least a place for certain people to live. So there seemed to be a staff there that that were there all the time, but we don't know how long they were there. I mean, they're there. We don't know how many more happen to be there. Okay, taking a look at Gobekli Tepe, uh, we realize here we go. Is like, well, what is it used for? What is it for? And we examine it, and we realize that yes, there's ritual action going on. What they're doing is that they're arriving at the site, and we have found the bones. There's a lot of them. They are sacrificing lots of animals, at the site, and they are. We know there's lots of blood. That there's lots of blood that was in the soil. So there's lots of blood that's flowing into the soil, uh, and um, and so it seems to be all centered around the middle area. In fact, many scholars have determined that this is indeed a mouth of the earth. It is the mouth of the earth. It is a place where they are sacrificing animals and sometimes humans to feed the earth. to give. Remember, I talked about life feeding upon life? Well, what they're doing is sacrificing all of these animals and giving it life. But there's more. There's evidence that they are viewing the limestone as alive. They see the limestone as alive. They are seeing that they're seeing the spirit is actually within the stones that circle around Gobekli Tepe. And what they will do is they will then feed this place of the earth in order for life to happen and life to happen abundantly. So, in many ways, with effect, of course, you're going to see that there's lots of infill in between, and they left all that was sacrificed in the soil, so they didn't remove it. So again, that which was sacrificed then becomes part of the material of the site, and it is filled with bone fragments and other kinds of interesting things that we all organic in matter, and especially the more towards the middle. So they are feeding it. Right? So that's Gobekli Tepe. So we could see, we could learn so much about ancient religion just by looking at it. But I want to make sure that I cover uh, briefly some other places nearby. So I want to give it some context. We have Navali Kori. Navali Kori, it's nearby, 9,000 BCE to 8,500 BCE. What is interesting about this place is that it also has T-shaped limestone blocks, just like Gobekli Tepe, and it's right next to Gobekli Tepe. They're near each other, and they're in the same fertile valley. So Gobekli Tepe is not the only one, and since it's 9,000 to 8,500 BCE, is still contemporaneous to Gobekli Tepe. Gobekli Tepe is just a little bit earlier, and we see more of uh, 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 these clay masks. In fact, we find an image of a man, and he has like a shaved head with a ponytail. And we see more evidence of a settled society, although in this case, it's very settled. Unlike Gobekli Tepe, it's a temporary dwelling place. Uh, uh, this site, it is more permanent in nature. And because of this, right nearby, directly nearby, we have determined agriculture started. That's right. Agriculture started right next to Gobekli Tepe and right next to Naveli Kori. We're talking like within 20 miles, we have found the first grain that was domesticated. Isn't that interesting? So we have evidence of the collection of all these of a sacred site that people would gather and they do sacrifices on a regular basis that was permanent. And then we find another site about 500 years later is established, and it's a permanent dwelling that also has the same T-shaped stones and carvings and so forth. So this is the beginning of a culture that becomes settled. And of course, uh, we also notice that the floors, they're clay floors, and they're figuring out, hey, if they can make clay floors, they can make pottery. And so pottery actually starts in that same area. Wow, except for the Jabon culture that had pottery as early as 14,000 BCE, this is the first instance of pottery, and we have the beginning of course, the various trades. I do want to mention a few other sites. We have about 4 minutes, and I don't want to cheat you out of the 4 minutes. There's another site, and now we're into the Neolithic period of time, called Kafir Huyak, 8,900 to 7,110 BCE. And we find that they are now using 90% of the tools are obsidian. And they have, of course, tripart shaped houses that are built. But we also realize that they are domesticating wheat now. So they have storehouses for wheat. So this is now an agricultural society. And barley too, and lentils. Yes. So this is the beginning of something called lentil soup. And then we have Esikli, who kept 8,200 BCE to 7,400 BCE. It's about 25 kilometers from Aksaray near Cappadocia. What I find is interesting about this is every one of these are important. It's in this case, the site is so permanent. How permanent is it? That every 30 to 60 years, they tear down the houses and they build directly on top of the same spot, the same exact spot. And then 30 to 60 years later, they tear it down and they build exactly the walls right on the same spot. Even the hearths are in the exact same spot. But at this point, we take a look, and this is important, is that people are, of course, buried underneath their floors because that's what people do. We look below, and we see that both sexes are represented, and the oldest male lived up to be 55 to 57 years old, and the oldest female, 20 to 25. We take a look at the bones, and we realize the women had a lot of hardship, but it shows that they're constantly on their knees, and arthritis and bone problems in that sense, probably doing more craft industries. While men, we see they have arthritis in parts of the bones that connect with hunting. And we're going to conclude on this last site, and that is Kayanu. And you do want to hear this. Cyonu, 7,200 to 6,600 BCE. At this site, unfortunately, they had what's called a flagstone building. It's made of large flagstones into which were set megalith stones. Floor was polished to make sure that nothing liquid would leak. Liquid. So what could be there? You know, what's liquid? Was it blood? Was it water? Was it wine? Well, the evidence arrives nearby. There is a skull building they discovered. Initially, they discovered 70 skulls. Then 295 skulls were discovered here. They found a large chamber that contained a 1-ton polished stone block. They found a large flint knife nearby, and it looks like an offering table. And they analyzed it, and they found on it not only blood of oryx and sheep, they found the blood of humans on it. And as it turns out, it was most likely a ritual human sacrifice site in order to, again, life feeds upon life. And apparently they had this down at a system at this a particular site. And there you have it. In fact, there are so many places in Anatolia that go into the Neolithic age that give us so much in the way of understanding how humans related to the world. In some cases, it's a beautiful, idyllic image of life. But what we also see is survival. And the cost of survival is often blood. Thank you so much.
Thank you. There's a question in the chat.
Thank you.
Thomas.
Yeah.
Asking if all of the pillars have been uncovered yet.
Not all the pillars, but most of them have. Yeah. In fact, they have just recently put together a place, enclosure. If you go online, you can take a look, and you can actually go now with permission and visit the site. And one of my friends just did, who's Turkey. So you can visit the site. So yes, a lot of it's uncovered. They did a lot of work in 2017 and 2018 and 2019. There's still not fully excavated, but it's lower sections, and they still haven't published it all. Not all published, but they're at the point now where they do allow some tourists with permission to visit. And one of my friends who's in Turkey, had a chance to go visit. So, that cool? We have, I know that we have Chattahoochee, which is really cool. Chattahoochee is 6,000 BCE, 5,000 BCE, right? This thing is 4,000 years earlier, so
Wow.
this is, so I mean, if you're on your way to Chattahoochee, make sure you go to Gobekli Tepe now, okay?
Okay.
Oh, and if you want, please Google images. Put in Gobekli Tepe, and you'll see some pictures of it, as well as the restorations.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
This is recorded?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So I know my son would love to hear this. Is it, will the recording be available or not?
Yes, there's a YouTube channel with all of Dr. Reitfeld's current lectures on it. I'll be posting this one in a day or two. And you'll find
Oh,
all
it's
of his old ones up there as well.
Thank you, Neil.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great storytelling.
Did you guys feel like you learned a lot about the Paleolithic, Neolithic religion?
Yes.
Kind of understand the mentality behind it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a fascinating site, and it's very exciting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I'll just add that there's, we find tons of female figurines everywhere. What I find is fascinating is we don't find that many at Gobekli Tepe. And
Oh.
what's the explanation for this? The idea is they're figuring out that men have a part in procreation. Remember, it's on the hill, so connected to the sky. So now they're focusing on the sky aspect. It doesn't mean because that there's no female figurines that are contemporaneous in other sites. In fact, we know the surrounding area, there's lots of female figurines. Just that this site is a kind of almost like a sacred phalli, but it's also a mouth to be fed. And so it could be understood as either one. And I'm sure it was viewed in both or many other ways at the same time. It just depends on who it is. But what hits me is how sophisticated the site was. So sophisticated earlier on. And you could take a look at these images. And then all of a sudden, we seem to go downhill. It's rather sad to see. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that the human sacrifice did occur here. We know that. But it seems to get worse later on. That's why I gave the example of the other place. So I'm not sure if that has to do with maybe the fertility of this particular valley is so good, they don't have to up the ante as much for the humans, or we become more, less sophisticated, we more open towards human sacrifice. It's pretty upsetting what we see later on. But people typically in the Tufian society are buried under the floors. They're even buried under the floors at Chattahoochee. They're buried under the floors. So when you die, you get to stay with the family. Isn't that good news? You're not going to go anywhere. I love Jericho. Jericho, which I visited, I've been there. What they used to do is that you walk into they're all circular houses, and you walk inside, and in the middle of each of the houses, on a small red ochre platform, they had a skull placed, had no jaw, and they put a plaster over its face. They put seashells for eyes, and that was the newest skull. And then they had a bunch of headless bodies underneath the floor, and then the heads were all along the perimeter facing outward. So basically, when you came home to Jericho, the first thing you see by looking at the front door is one of your relatives. maybe grandpa looking at you, his skull looking at you. But, hey, I'm home. You feel comforted by that, And then what happens is that when somebody dies, what they would do is like tire rotation. What they would do is they would do excarnation, because this is how they did this in the Tufians. The Tufians would always do excarnation, and that means they have the birds clean off the bodies. And they did this also in the Gobekli Tepe area, the Balikori area. And when the flesh is all cleaned off, then what they would do is then they would place the head on the podium, and they put the body under the ground. And then when the next person dies, let's just say the grandpa dies, you put his head there. When grandma dies, then you put her body out. You let the birds clean it all up, and then you put grandma's body under the house, and then you take grandpa's head and you remove it from the podium, and you put that in the perimeter facing outward, and you put grandma's head there instead. So the idea is the newest dead was the one whose head was on the podium, which kind of tells you they're living the realm between, they are the last ones, they are the ancestors that are most close to life to communicate. For us, and this is the truth, by the way, all over Anatolia too. People are constantly being buried, family members, underneath their homes. Now, if we did this today, we'd be filling out a crime report. It's like, but for them, they gain comfort. I know it sounds strange. They gain comfort that the bones, the energy of their family sanctified their homes. I know it's hard to think that way, but for them, this was comforting. This was beautiful. This was a good thing. That the sacred space was defined by the family, and it made it more powerful for them. And that culture lasted a long time. The last vestiges of this idea continued, and what happened is, this is fascinating, is that it turned out it continued all the way to the babies. So they discontinued the adults. What we see in pre-dynastic Egypt and other places, they continue burying the babies that die in the home, within the domestic space. Fortunately, then we get to the Canaanites, and then they do the sacrifice of the babies. It goes into that's later on. We're not there yet. So this is not intentional killing, and we can tell, by the way. So blade marks or anything on the bones or anything else like that on the neck. So natural. Any questions?
I have a question. How common was excarnation in the ancient world? I know it's still part of like Zoroastrian burial practices, but you don't hear of it much.
Extremely. In fact, it was one of the ways of doing it. As soon as we get into the abstract period and into the mythic linguistic, this is kind of the way to go. There are some reasons for that. First of all, there's people didn't want to touch flesh. There's a feeling of a taboo feeling of touching flesh. Although there is some evidence that some people taking off the flesh, for the most part, they felt that putting it on a raised platform and letting birds eat it was the most wholesome way of doing this. Because birds would clean it all up. It's nice and white. Birds, I know we don't sit around watching birds, but if you do, you know what I'm talking about. If you have a bird, you know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. They're thorough. They will find everything. They'll clean it up. So they do a better job than we would. And plus, you're feeding them. And what did I just teach you about? Life feeds upon life. Hey, and you're making offerings to the sky. So this is like a sky burial. You're energizing the sky. Maybe you'll get some rain out of it too.
Yeah, aren't birds usually the messengers to the gods? I mean,
they are. They certainly are. In fact, there's evidence that already they are looking at the flight of birds to read the future, the omens. Yeah. So how they fly. So they are connected to the realm of the sky. So what will happen is they'll clean it up, and we know that they do it because birds they leave the peck marks on the skulls and on the bones. So it doesn't take too long to figure out. Hey, guess what? I wonder if this was cleaned up by birds, because you find the peck marks because the bones invariably there are weaker areas. The beak goes right through. Is this helpful? Right? So it's very popular. very popular amongst the Natufians, especially. Natufians were very much into this. Let's let the bird clean it all up, and then we'll go ahead and we'll bury it under the house, or we'll put it into like a, later on a bone box or some kind of context like that. And they will remove the head. Sometimes there's evidence though that they chop off the head ahead of time. I think that's interesting because we know, sometimes they chop the head off and then they lay it out. In other cases, the head, of course, is already comes off pretty easily once the bird cleaned it all up. And that's the nature of it.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Okay, there's a question in the chat. I might have been looking up the link when they posted it. Why do you think the artwork de-evolved? Did that get asked yet?
Well, it has not. And it's a really good question, and it's disturbing. And a lot of scholars have said that maybe there were more highly evolved civilizations before this. Now, I know we're kind of going on murky ground here, but if you guys ever heard of the Jomon culture, it started 14,000 BCE in Japan and continued around to 300 BCE. That's a long time. They were settled in Japan early because what happened is they're still hunters and gatherers, but there was so much food in Japan that they didn't have to go that far to collect. So they have permanent dwellings. Because they had those permanent dwellings, even though they're hunter-gatherer civilizations, so a society, because of that fact, they developed pottery. But there's evidence that they also created monumental architecture. And because between 13,000 to 10,000 BCE, the ice melted, the water level rose up. And that means it inundated much of the coastline. And so Japanese archaeologists are discovering constantly all of these interesting stone motifs off the coast of Japan. Even though many American archaeologists say, nah, these are just natural formations. The Japanese archaeologists are saying, what are you guys doing? No, these are really early. And it shows a great deal of sophistication. We also realize that this may be the case because people like living along the coastline. Hello, we're in California, right? So the problem is that 13,000, 10,000 BCE, as the water rises, many of the sites, even in Turkey, right, where Anatolia, were placed underwater, and we're finding things offshore. So it's possible that before the Young Dryas, society was a little bit more sophisticated for a short period of time, and then that wonderful thing happened, and we kind of de-evolved. But the remnants of that connected to Gobekli Tepe, and then we de-evolved from there. I know it's a really long answer. I apologize, but this adds to something else, and that is, we think agriculture started right next to Gobekli Tepe, but let's be honest, we don't know about offshore. We don't know. Maybe agriculture started along the coast. I mean, wouldn't you think that agriculture would start along the coast? But the problem is that coastline is no longer there. It's underwater. So we can't find evidence for it. So this could be a remnant of that society. And then it became, as time went on, it became more dissipated and in a sense de-evolved. That's the theory. So don't quote me on it, but that's what other scholars are saying. Does that answer the question? We're on our way downhill.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Yeah. So, like I said, and the problem is that people will go too far on this, and they will say, "Was this Atlantis, or is this that, or this?" You can see where this opens up a great mess. And so, my answer to all of that is just look up Jomon culture, Jomon, and take a look at the images for yourself, what they found offshore, and determine whether or not there is merit to it. In fact, I'm looking right now, and I will even give you. Let's see if I can give you some names. Oh yeah, this is the controversy, but I'll give you the word. It's called the Yad Nugani Monument. Yanugani. So Yanugani. And we look at these formations are made out of very fine sandstone and mudstone. But many of these formations arise from underlying rock mass, but they appear to be carved as opposed to eroding naturally. Evident shapes consist of flat parallel faces, sharp edges, and right and precise obtuse angles. We see, so some people say it's natural, some people say it's not. And what I think is interesting is when people are debunking this, they've actually found another one further down, and another one further down, and another one further down. So if it's a natural formation, then how come it keeps reappearing and in different kinds of geological stone at the bottom, which kind of goes against it. So after a while, it starts becoming okay. Maybe they are something. Because you debunk one, you think you have it covered, and then you find the same thing replicated in another place. You would start entering into very interesting critical thinking situations. So this is good, right? So there is that sensibility that I don't even know what I'm answering anymore, but there's more information. There was some more sophistication, maybe possibly earlier on, but if it had been, it's wiped out because unfortunately the ocean, right, would wipe it out with the rising tides. You have the ice sheets melting, water rises, it's gone. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Looks like I answered all the questions. It's good. All right. So you'll never look at sacrifice the same again, right? So
Actually, can I ask one more?
sure.
Sorry to. When you mentioned about how they chopped off the heads and sometimes the feet
Oh yeah.
as part of the burial and the ritual. So what was the purpose of that, do you believe? Was that so the spirits could exit, basically?
Well, it's a good question. I love the question. Since the spirit was obviously, they believe it is in the head, and we saw lots of headless images all over Gobekli Tepe, right? More than just one, there's a few others. The spirit is in the head, so it could be the idea that I'm cutting the head off to release the spirit. It could also be I'm cutting the head off because I don't want the spirit coming back. And that may explain the reason why they're cutting the feet off. they're afraid that it's going to come back. And so we're kind of going into this almost like this vampire.
Yeah, that's what they did to the vampires in Europe.
Yes. And
Yeah.
that is a legacy of that. In fact, I have a book called Lawson over here that goes into this, that Paleolithic religion into Neolithic religion oftentimes manifests itself into folklore, even in Eastern Europe. And some of the habits that were done back then continued on, and does connect to the vampire stories and others. Yeah, people. It's an interesting situation, but people when they go to sleep, sometimes in the dream they see their loved ones, and they think, "Oh no, they're back. The spirit is haunting me." Right? It may not be a good dream, so they want to make sure that that's dead, if that makes any sense. Or they want to make sure that the spirit is released. Of course, that brings us to the bear cult. Remember, they cut the head off the bear, and they're putting it into the totem. Maybe, are they doing it because they want to stop the bear from attacking, and they want to contain it? Or they're wanting to. There's a bear, the bear spirit they want to conquer before they hunt, or maybe there's another reason. There's lots of possibilities, but one thing is for sure is that they believe that the spirit is in the head, and they're manipulating that by cutting it off for a ritualistic purpose that seems to be connected to some kind of spiritual emotion.
Yeah, because I read the Gobekli Tepe, the pillars themselves could represent the actual human shape. Like the T is the
Yeah.
shoulders, and then you have the feet. So that would indicate that the head is missing. So that
Yeah,
would be very important.
that's a possibility because as I mentioned, you see the hand carved on each side of the T or the shoulders, and yes, the heads do seem to be missing. And
Conspicuously missing.
you're a little bit ahead of me on that one. I just played head
Well, thank
games. Okay. Sorry. I am a scholar after all. Oh no, no, I'm in trouble now. Okay, but yeah. So, but it could be again. It's a ritualistic aspect. Maybe it's a dance. Maybe it's a circle of some sort. And I think it's interesting that they have outside circle, then the inside circle, and then the inner circle. But each one becomes more crude as they go along, and then they tear it all down and they build another one, or each circle gets eroded away. They leave all their junk behind. That's what I think is the most interesting part. Is if when you have a sacred space, shouldn't you clean up afterwards?
Right.
So what they do is they find the refuge in different pits. They just kind of leave it there and it's buried with it. And it's like, well, no, you got it. They want to keep the sacrifices in the ground. Kind of reminds
Just
me
like the floors, like you said,
floors.
keeping your bodies in the floors and stuff.
Keep the bodies in the floors, right? Because of the
Interesting.
energy that's in there, the feeding. Because then maybe if you remove it, then you're starving the spirits. Yes, Lori.
Interesting.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot about Gobekli Tepe through Ancient Aliens, of course. And my wondering is, could it have been used, the circles been used as a pins in order to house animals or gather them together in one space to make sacrificing easier? If they had like a bunch of gazelles in this one area, cordoned off by wood, which of course the wood would decay over time, and then snakes in another one, and so on and so on. Wouldn't that have been easier to keep the animals pinned up?
Well, yeah, it would be. Yeah, but they discovered actually 4, really 5 structures on the site that it could have used that to store some of the animals in there. But the problem is that there's in this space, it's not a holding area; it's a sacrificial area. So they are. It's a ritualistic space where we see that in the middle, they are constantly turning the soil for various sacrifices. So it probably wouldn't be that comfortable for the gazelles jumping over the gazelles and the other animals in that space. Having said that, no, I do agree with you that there would have to be a place to store these animals, especially since nothing is domesticated yet.
Yes.
None of it is, there's no domesticated animals yet. Like I said, the delusion of the gazelles hasn't set out yet. They're going to figure out in like 500 more years that it's not going to work out. So there would have to be a place where they would store these animals, especially since it looks like that they would have these giant feasts all at one time. We can date the refuge because we can date anything that is living using carbon dating 14 and other strategies. And once we get to the point where they have clay, we can do electron dating and so forth, and we can figure out how old things are. And we have enough evidence where we know dating these things, they're eating all the time. They're having lots of big meals there on a regular basis. It looks like annual basis at least. So maybe this is a big feast where they all come together. All these tribes come together once clans come together once a year from all over, and they have a big sacrifice to the earth and to the sky. Isn't that beautiful? Because you have the idea it's on the hill, and it kind of moves towards the sky. but at the same time, there's an aspect that goes into the earth. So it does kind of bring together earth and sky together. And maybe to secure the union between that with these animal sacrifices. But it looks like that they are, in some cases, eating these animals. And in other cases, they're killing them and they are sacrificing the entire animal to whatever spirit they're wanting to give to. So we have both versions.
And what about crossbreeding? Do you think they tried a little bit of that?
Crossbreeding, at this point, I don't see that, but it's possible. Just because I wouldn't know doesn't mean that it's a no or a yes. I'm very big on, if I don't know, I'll say I don't know. I don't know if there's a lot of crossbreeding.
Well, I was just thinking, because they have different animals on different pegs, the totems basically, and wondering if maybe they're trying to crossbreed those animals.
They could be doing experimentation. It's possible because the Auric will eventually become more, domesticated cattle will come about. We do have to wait about 2,000 years later, but hey, maybe you got to start somewhere, and it's possible. What we do know, however, is that the Auric and many of these are wild, and they're spearing them, and we find the evidence literally in their bones that they are. And can you imagine? They have to kill something these gigantic animals being only 10 meters away. Can you imagine how scary that would be? It's at you. I mean, nowadays it'd be at least 40 meters, but
yeah, with guns, yeah.
Yeah, but 10 meters, they have to be pretty brave. And so they're definitely hunting these, but that they're yearning to domesticate them. But unfortunately, my short answer is the sad answer. It's called gazelles. 60% of the bones are gazelle bones. They just are not giving up on these.
It makes me want to get a pet gazelle.
It does, right?
See if I can domesticate.
Maybe they just taste good.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, does anybody ever have gazelle before?
No.
I mean, maybe it tastes. Maybe the 4,000 year. I know it tastes like chicken. Well, I mean, maybe the 4,000 year obsession is that it really tastes amazing. We just don't know it. It's like, wow, now we know why they were doing this. But but they just did not give up on the gazelle. So we don't really learn very fast. And then of course, as I mentioned before, we went from there to goats. And 500 years later, we figured out this is not working and our environment is dying during the desert. And we still have the remnants of the damage today in Jordan and parts of Syria. That's goat damage. That's goat damage from thousands and thousands of years ago, because then the topsoil washed away. And I mentioned Israeli archaeologists near Tel Afar had mentioned this, is that they're planting trees. They're trying to in the Negev area. They're trying to bring back life. And I asked, so those goats, 500 years of of environmental destruction, and we're still living with it. It tells you that we do pay a price for what we do. And then we moved to sheep, and that was a smart move because they fertilize. That's great. We love the fact they fertilize. They eat up the grass. They're great for wool, clothing. That's lamb chops. I mean, you go to the Middle East, everything is lamb. You read like ancient writings or the Bible, everything's like shepherds and sheep. I mean, they love. And this was like this big moment of like, whoa. So it does. And we finally domesticate cattle around 6,000 BCE. And pigs come about around that time too. Pigs are sometimes even before cattle, to be honest. Piggies.
In ancient Judaism too, the cloven hoof is considered the only type of food that you should eat.
Yeah.
The pig was considered dirty.
Yep.
Probably because there were so many of them in that area. That's all they could eat.
But trichinosis too, right?
I've heard that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and of course, piggies, it depends on the climate. When it comes to pigs, they don't do very well in desert areas. They are very wasteful. They eat everything.
They need a lot of water.
A lot of water. They're hard to raise. They're not cost effective. Also, they They do, again, eat everything. And when in the desert, things deteriorate in a very fast way, and they eat that anyway because they have no sensibility of what is rotting and no, I shouldn't eat this. So they become very sick piggies pretty quickly in a desert area. In a more fertile area like Gobekli Tepe, it's not as much of a problem. Lots, it's more, so they have plenty to eat. They're pigs, plenty to eat, and so it turns out there could be environmental reasons, like in the Middle East. If you're, come from a Jewish background, Arab background, even the ancient Egyptians, no to piggies.
No
The
piggies.
Akkadians, right? No to piggies. But when you get to this area, they go yes to piggies. So they're eating pigs here, but that's probably because again, it's a different environment. Yeah. In
Like
fact,
when you said in Japan, sorry to interrupt, but you said like in Japan, they were more settled. It made me think of maybe because of they had access to the ocean for all the fish. They didn't have to travel out as far to get their food.
yes, they had access to fish. And by the way, fish was always a major component within the Japanese diet, which is, also fresh water. But also in addition to that, um, Japan, got to remember, this is before the Ice Age, retreated. Japan was even more idyllic when it comes, it was so fertile, so wonderful, even more varieties when it comes to fruits and natural foods, that they had so much abundance that pottery was discovered 4,000 years before everybody else used it, because pottery is used to store food. Nobody who's migrating, does pottery because, it's like, hey, you can't store anything and you're traveling along and it goes boom, crack.
Can't bring your Tupperware to go.
Yes, yeah, exactly. The pottery, what they would do is they dig a big hole, and they would put the pottery into the hole in either in your dwelling place or outside or in a silo, and they would store the food there, and it would preserve because it's in the soil, and then you cover it over. It was perfect. It was like Tupperware, that way. But so there's a lot of food abundance, and so they're settled before everybody else happened to be, and that's society. The Jomon culture lasted to 300 BCE. It's the longest surviving civilization, I think, in existence. 14 to 300. That's a long time. 4,000. So,
Wow.
yeah. So it's I think Jomon culture. I mean, someday I'll do a talk on it. I don't know. I mean, it is fascinating. Ancient Aliens loves it because they they have the they went through a period where they had the goggle eyes. They look like they're wearing space helmets. It's not, but they look like it. They look like astronauts. Various totems and so forth. Very rich, sophisticated culture. And of course, the origins of Shintoism arises from that culture. So, any other questions? All right. Well, this has been fun, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great job. Great job.
Absolutely
Thank you so
amazing.
much.
Absolutely amazing.